So the FF Plus have also indicated their intention to approach the High Court with an urgent application to challenge the national lockdown and the validity of the National Disaster Management Act. The party says that the regulations put in place for the lockdown are unconstitutional as it is severely hampering the economy and livelihoods of many. The FF Plus says that the lockdown and regulations have already worked to flatten the curve of coronavirus infections in the country, and government must now prioritize the further reopening of the economy. The advocacy group AfriForum says that it intends bringing more litigation against government to force it to reopen the economy. Now, for some analysis on both these cases, we're now joined via Skype by political analyst Professor Somadoda Fikeni. Prof, a very good afternoon to you. Thank you so very much for joining us here on SABC News.
Thank you, Flo, and greetings to your viewers.
What do you make of these court challenges by opposition parties, the DA and the FF Plus? Is it not a case of sort of jumping the gun? I mean, the president has already mentioned the fact that the restrictions will be eased in any case, and that there is some consultations happening in order for us to move to, you know, level 3, level 2, level 1, and so forth. Are these not premature?
They may be premature, but at the same time, this is more revealing of the fault lines that South Africa has as a divided nation. We had the initial unified approach because people were still shocked about what was happening around the world and in the country. And now I can imagine that there are so much pressures coming from the various constituencies of these political formations. And it is not ironic or it is not coincidental that you have DA, FF Plus and AfriForum literally rushing to court, because one would imagine that their business constituencies might be putting enormous pressure, never mind the arguments which are presented, in these public forums. The main pressure point might actually be their own constituencies. Yes, they do have a point in saying that you ought to have some clarity on certain areas or even a rethink on the times of exercise. But the choice of alcohol, the choice of tobacco, as well as the choice of exercising is indicative of the social classes they might be dealing with.
Is this move to try and score political points? I mean, you mentioned the fact that they are necessarily speaking for certain constituencies, and I try to get the answer out of the DA leader, John Steenhuisen, as to whom exactly he is speaking for, and I couldn't quite get him to talk about who they're targeting, you know, their conversations for, or who they've been speaking to. In your analysis, who exactly are these South Africans that they claim to be speaking to? And I think you kind of touched on it a little bit there.
It is no-brainer when you get into some of the social media spaces and conversations. You tend to have a racially divided society. When DA starts such discussions, you're most likely going to have more whites participating, never mind their constituency, which they may claim is more diverse. But you will have the business sector, especially big business, which may also be the major funders, as well as mainly your white compatriots participating in this in this particular space and prevailing. With the Freedom Front Plus, it will mainly be your white Afrikaner constituencies, the same with the AfriForum. That is why when you talk of certain levels of interventions, when you talk of certain reforms post-COVID-19, they may not show the same level of enthusiasm, but in terms of public discourse, it makes sense that everybody will say, I'm fighting for everybody. But at the same time, we do know for a fact that constituencies do differ, and they'll get more pressure from their own constituencies.
Let me ask you a pointed question, Prof. In terms of the president's leadership style throughout the coronavirus outbreak and us having to deal with lockdown and all of that, do you believe that he is leading correctly?
He is to some degree leading correctly, but at the same time, there are certain weaknesses that he has to attend to. For example, in between the announcements, he ought to be giving us a greater deal of vision as to where do we go to stimulate economy whilst balancing the pandemic, which may be with us for a longer time. At the same time, he might also be raising fundamental questions about the system that we have, which has shown that inequality and poverty confined to certain areas make it very difficult to respond to some of this crisis. And the third element here, I do think that a greater degree of detail and accountability in an interactive session. Yes, it doesn't have to be Donald Trump or Boris Johnson coming every day to tell us what is happening. But when he comes, he may have to create a space to take us into confidence as to his logic, as well as the assumption of the different views coming in, how these have been fused into the decision making.
All right, Prof. Somadoda Fikeni, we appreciate your time here on SABC News. Thank you very much for your input. That's political analyst Professor Somadoda Fikeni speaking to us. Let's take a short break. Do stay with us. Just sports news after this.